today we're talking about diet breaks and refeeds with the men. Obviously, he's got and he's doing a PhD on this, so this is the area that he is on researching. I'm very pleased to have him on. We're going to talk about diet breaks and to bring some light on some truth and some myth about diet break. I am very excited to have him on, so let's get him to start speaking with him about this. Hi, Jackson. How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very excited to have you on and talking about all about diet breaks. But before that, let me know a little bit about. Obviously, you're the man of the diet breaks. That's how I introduce you. I basically want to know your opinion on utilization of diet breaks. Is that something that has changed your mind along the way when it comes to talk about diet breaks and referring to how do they have an effect? Is there any sort of positive effect, any difference or impact, meaningful impact on utilizing diet breaks?
So I originally wrote a review paper that was co-authored with Helms, Lane Norton, Dr. Andy Galpin. I think that's all of them. I don't want to miss any. But we basically, it was a speculative paper, and we discussed the potential or theoretical applications that diet breaks might have, specifically focusing on the both the physiological and psychological benefits that could gained from using intermittent dieting strategies like refeeds and diet breaks. Now, at the point of writing that paper and sort of perusing through the limited existing research that we did have, I was really quite confident that, at least let's focus on diet breaks, that diet breaks were going to, number one, probably improve fat loss efficiency, which basically means the amount of fat that you're able to lose per unit of calorie restriction. I was quite confident that they were going to better maintain not only resting metabolic rate, but also satiety through mediation of leptin. We were quite confident of that. And thirdly, I was quite confident that diet breaks were going to allow you to retain more lean mass over the course of a weight loss phase through having those intermittent, basically resaturation periods of muscle glycogen. And we know the positive benefits on muscle protein synthesis that occur when you sort of resaturate muscle glycogen, or in other words, the catabolic effects that can happen when muscle glycogen levels get too low, such as during a dieting period. So that was all what I thought. And I was like, okay, great. Let's run the study and let's see what they were my hypotheses. Since running the trial, oh man, like my head's done a bit of a 180, to be honest. Now at the point that I'm currently sitting at you speaking with you now, I am not convinced that diet breaks will have any meaningful impact on maintaining your resting metabolic rate over the course of like a 12-15 week diet break. Weight loss phase. I'm not convinced that diet breaks are going to allow you to better maintain your lean mass either. And I don't even think that they're going that diet breaks impact leptin really whatsoever.
Okay.
I'm not just pulling this out of my butt. Like, I measured leptin throughout the study, and I'm looking at these figures here, and I just think that the benefits of leptin that we originally sort of speculated, like everyone in our little fitness community was always like leptin, that's the key, and why we're refeeding on high carb and whatnot. But it was real. Now that I think about it, it was really based on weak data. Like, we didn't have much. It was like on a few overfeeding trials with overweight populations, and it wasn't weight maintenance calories or anything like that. It was like these massive surplus of carbohydrates. Now, I'm just really not convinced that leptin is this key player anymore. So with all that said, that's not to say that I don't think diet breaks have any utility whatsoever. I think they still have some merit, but the merit lies within the impacts that they're going to have on appetite management, number one. As an adherence measure, I just know that for dealing with a lot of not only my clients that I work with outside of research, but also the research participants, Once they were getting, so for some context, my diet break protocol was 3 weeks of dieting followed by 1 week of diet break. And I just found that with a lot of my participants, they would get to the second week or the third week of the deficit, and they would, the deficit would start sucking a bit, and they're like, oh, this kind of hurts. But because they knew they had that diet break coming in only 7, 8, 9 days, they more often than not, they just said, okay, but I could hang on because I knew the increase in food was coming very soon. So from that perspective, I do think they have merit as an adherence measure. They can just increase the overall enjoyment of weight loss too. We shouldn't underestimate the impact of the psychological impacts of someone incorporating a diet break or a refeed, and that allowing them to be able to go out and have a restaurant meal with their family members and not feel so isolated. Like for the contest preppers that are listening to this, they will empathize strongly with the isolation that sometimes, in a way, necessary to get sort of really stage lean. But they'll also understand that it can just be a nasty place, and being able to go and socialize and interact and just reinstate some normality can have quite a pronounced impact on like a quite pronounced positive impact on our psychology, and just basically giving us a refresh and a reset, and feeling a little bit normalizing that, okay, now we can push on again, without sort of redlining it consistently the whole time. So yeah, just to summarize all that, I think diet breaks a do have merit for managing appetite. I think if you are using regular diet breaks, you are going to have lower hunger throughout the weight loss phase compared to if you just deficit every day of the weight loss phase. I do think that they can, for some people, be used to facilitate adherence or their ability to maintain the calorie deficit. But I do think that the physiological benefits of diet breaks are heavily, heavily overstated. And I think that we're going to see a massive change in the fitness community with respect to how we talk about these things in the very near future.
Does that make sense? And I think the part of the adherence and the hunger management makes sense a lot. But when it comes to looking at some cons of using diet breaks, do you find that obviously a part of extending the length of a dieting period to make it longer as compared to a constrained continuous restriction of a diet, would you say that are there other cons of utilizing diet breaks?
The increasing the length of the weight loss phase is definitely the biggest con. Like if you're using the protocol that I used in my research study, you're increasing the duration by 25%. Like that's no insignificant amount of time. And diet breaks aren't a free for all. That, like, you ask anyone who's using diet breaks when they're actually sort of losing a bunch of fat since they've begun. Diet break still requires an enormous amount of restraint. And it's like, more often than not, it just feels like it's like hell, but just slightly more cooled over. You know what I mean? It's not like they could take a trip to Nando's and just sort of eat to their heart's content. So yeah, absolutely, lengthening the phase is certainly the biggest con in my books. But secondly, there is another con, but it doesn't apply to everyone, and it's a con that's allowing people a higher caloric target for a certain period of time can sometimes lead into a much higher caloric intake than that was originally intended to. And I'll explain why. So let's say that person A has been dieting for 3 weeks on 2,500 calories, which is a pretty pronounced caloric deficit for them. Because their calories are restricted, they are being smart, and they're going to consume the large majority of that calories from very low energy dense foods, very high satiety foods, like maybe, let's say, for example, oatmeal, brown rice, chicken breast, lots of veggies and things like that. Now, for some people, when you say, listen, we're going to run a diet break now because you've done a great job for your 3 weeks of dieting on 2,500, we're going to increase your calories to 3,300 for 7 days. And then they think, holy smokes, 3,300, I can fit sushi and I can fit cereal and I can fit low-fat ice cream into my plan. Now, all of a sudden, this low energy dense diet with really high satiety foods turns into this really high energy dense diet. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why some people report higher hunger during refeeds and diet breaks. It's not because their hunger is ramping up. I think they're just because they've got more ability to fit in tasty treats that are actually quite high calorically dense and aren't very satiating. It just doesn't make them feel like they're actually consuming that much food, and they're probably actually consuming less food weight compared to when they were eating their 2,500 calories, even though it's at 3,300 calories this time. And sometimes just the taste sensation of having some cereal or some soup or something that you haven't had for 3 or 4 weeks, something that's really, really palatable, it doesn't really suppress the urge more often than not. It just sort of drives consumption of more and more and more. So for some people, having diet breaks or refeeds can actually be sort of a devil in disguise, and it can sort of, on face value, it looks like it's a smart move, but it often leads sort of this spiraling into a binge episode or something because they just can't quench this desire or this their appetite for these really tasty that they've now introduced for a short to their diet. So that can be completely avoided if you just stick to the same sort of foods that you're eating on your low days compared to your refeed or diet breakdown. But a lot of people who are sort of what we call dieters, they will want to sort of start trying to fit in as many treats as they can.
And that really makes sense in the sense that when you do a diet break, a lot of people think that is like a free-for-all, you can eat whatever you want. It's a break from the diet, but it's actually not a break from the diet. It's just trying to increase your calories to your current maintenance calories and just pretty much allowing to get out of the deficit for a little bit. But it doesn't mean like you're allowed to eat whatever you want as much as you want, or like just go into a book a holiday and just eat into a buffet or something like that. So I think it really makes sense to sort of, when you go into, it could be very damaging for people having that mindset that they can just eat whatever, to just start eating things that can be very highly palatable, very low satiating, and it's actually potentially more triggering and like triggering with the reward centers, and that you want to keep going because it sort of takes you out of the groove of the sort of low, the regular dieting foods that you're using, and it feels like it actually can take you out of that mindset.
Big time.
And it might be just difficult to come back.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Let me ask you one thing, and should you expect to like gain some fat or gain weight when you do a diet break overall, or not necessarily?
You shouldn't gain fat. So when I looked at the 30 participants in my research trial that were allocated to the diet break group, I basically took out their laboratory weigh-ins for each of their like periods of energy balance, which was their diet break, and compared it to like the week. The overall, do we see a trend in upwards of weight? Do we see a trend in upwards of fat and whatnot? The process that we use to calculate the diet breaks would make me suggest that they should be pretty close to not much fat should be getting gained. It was being gained. It was probably adherence issues. But when I mapped it out, overall, the mean increase in weight was something like 100 grams, so really quite insignificant. And there was no change in body fat. It was actually slightly less body fat, believe it or not, maybe 40 grams, but not basically significant or anything like that. So I would say as a general, some weight gain is okay, because after we've got to remember that usually during refeeds and diet breaks, or diet breaks specifically, that's going to involve 7 days or more of quite a pronounced increase in carbohydrate intake. And when that happens, we're going to see an increase in muscle glycogen retention and an increase in water retention that is bound to that glycogen. So with that in mind, a little bit of weight gain was almost expected. But if you're gaining sort of more than if you're gaining more than around about a kilo across that week, that probably tells me that however you calculated your caloric intake for the diet break is probably a little bit higher, because in my study, I think the highest weight gain that we saw during the diet break week, even for like the bigger dudes, was something like 910 grams or something, like massive amounts of weight gain. So if you are gaining more than a kilo or something like that, you're probably overdoing it. But then you also got to ask yourself, why are we actually doing the diet breaks in the first place? Because I just said that the physiological benefits aren't really that. I don't think they're that true. So we're doing it for the adherence and the appetite benefits. Well, they can probably still be achieved even if you're in a bit of a surplus. You know what I mean? So that we don't need to be right on that maintenance figure like we previously thought for diet breaks.
And when you try to make a difference between diet breaks and refeeds, in the sense of the effects on the adherence and managing hunger, do you find any difference, or any, like, why would you use one over the other?
Usually just like time left before your end goal. Like if you've got a client who's 6 weeks out from a bodybuilding show, and like they're on really low calories and like their hunger is super high, the adherence is being threatened. You can't throw a 1 week diet break at them at that point if they've still got a bunch of fat. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
basically, like the consolation prize might be like a 1 or a 2 day refeed, where you can still potentially get some slight benefits in terms of managing and managing sort of psychology, but it isn't going to be too long that it's take away from that important time that you need to actually be sort of improving and losing fat. That's what people need to remember, is refeed and diet break time is not time spent sort of getting closer to your goal. It's when you've sort of taken the car, pulled off to the side, and chucked it in park for a little bit of time.
Okay. And is it true that the leaner you get, the more diet breaks and refeeds you should have to prevent the loss of lean body mass?
Well, we don't know because it hasn't been tested, but theoretically it makes sense, because leaner people, they tend to have really skewed hunger cues. So like really, really high hunger, finding it really, really difficult to establish sort of satiety even between meals or after meals. And we also know that that's when they start getting the really lean people. That's when the psychological impairment really starts taking place. Now, you remember me saying before that I think that the strongest rationale we have for using diet breaks right now is basically to manage appetite and to facilitate adherence. So I think, yes, diet breaks, it makes sense that they would work best for the leaner people, because they're the sort of people that are actually struggling with issues the most. For someone who's quite overweight and just early into their dieting phase, they might not even have like notable hunger between meals. They might just be eating because that's what they've been told to eat. And adherence might not be an issue whatsoever. So with that frame of mind, what would be the purpose of using a diet break for that person? Probably not much.
Okay. So when you mentioned that you actually didn't find much of a significance in terms of preserving your basal metabolic rate, was that significant that you actually feel like there's no real benefit on that?
No, I don't think there's any benefits for preserving metabolic rate with diet breaks. Like what we saw is, so I measured their metabolic rate immediately before the diet break. So that was on the back of 3 weeks of dieting, and then immediately after the diet break, and then again like a week later. And what I saw was, comparing pre and post diet break, we saw like a small, maybe 75 calorie increase in mean resting metabolic rate, which is really not enough to cause like massive amounts of fat to just start falling off you. You know, it's really much. It's an extra banana a day. Like it's not that important. And what's even makes it less important is that by about day 5 after the diet break was over, so they'd been back in their deficit for 5 days, there was no elevation in resting metabolic rate. So what it looks like happens is the diet break causes the resting metabolic rate to increase, but only to a small amount, And then as soon as the sort of calorie deficit gets back put in place, within a matter of days, you're back to the pre-diet break value anyway.
Okay. When it comes to refeeds now, is there any benefit to decide that you want to do 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? How many days are kind of significant to actually have some kind of effect on people's adherence or any sort of benefit around? Like you mentioned, leptin hasn't really got an actual effect when you implement refeeds, but what do you find in terms of how many days you should be implementing at minimum to sort of get a positive effect on refeeds?
Yeah, see, it's a tough question. We probably don't have a clear answer yet, just because we've had the Campbell guys evaluate like a 2-day, and we've had the Davuti study, which was like a 3-day, but in like overweight females, and then nutrition breakdown was complete crap. So we really don't have much data to pull from. I think that the adherence benefits for some people, that can be achieved in as little as 1 day. Like sometimes 1 day can just be enough to sort of recharge the batteries, reset the mind frame, and get you in the right sort of frame of mind to push on for your next 6 days of deficit. I would say that probably the leaner you get, the more time you're probably going to want for your refeed. Let's say that if we had a 16-week dieting phase, perhaps the first 8-week adherence could probably be facilitated with 1 refeed day a week. But then probably that second 8-week block, or that 8 to 4 weeks out block, one day of refeeding is probably not going to cut it for sort of providing some adherence benefits or some psychological benefits. And then we might have to bump it to 2. And then that last 4 weeks, when we're really grinding, when adherence is sort of really under pressure, hunger is really sky high, maybe 2 days that isn't going to get it cut it. Maybe we need to push to 3. So I probably think that the number of refeeds that you're using per week should be scaled with the dieting phase and how lean you get.
So perhaps you're saying that the leaner you get or the lower your calories get, the more frequent refeeds you might need?
Maybe not more frequent, but perhaps longer duration.
Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Going from a 1 day a week to a 2 days per week or 3 days per week or something like that. But if you were using, maybe an increase in frequency would still make sense too. Like, for example, maybe if you started dieting at 16 weeks out, maybe you just wouldn't need, like maybe adherence wouldn't be so under threat that you need to have a weekly refeed. Maybe you might only need to have them once every 3 weeks in that early phases. But when that diet fatigue starts building up and the adherence starts getting challenged and those negative sort of adaptations associated with the energy deficit start kicking in, maybe you need to bump it up to sort of weekly or bi-weekly refeeds.
Okay. Does it make
speculating?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, does it make sense to like putting them back to back, or it doesn't matter if you make it Monday or Friday or something like that?
Yeah, that's another tough one. So I think more time back to back makes more sense.
Yeah.
Basically because, like, I've looked at the data on refeeds that we have, and that includes the Campbell paper, and then looking at sort of longer time spent in energy balance, like more so like a diet break. So we'd be comparing like a 2 days back to back to like a 7 days back to back. And it seems like, at least from like a psychological standpoint and an adherence standpoint, more time gives more benefits. So if the like dieting phase allows it, I think more time back to back is a better idea. Obviously, that's going to be a luxury item though. Not everyone can do that. For example, if you've got an athlete who's only 5 weeks out, you're not just going to be able to spend 7 days in energy balance like that. Maybe that's when you will have to use a 2 or something to get to.
Yeah.
But if you are giving yourself sort of ample time to get to your sort of end goal body composition or whatever your end target is, then maybe you can fit in some time back to back, like a 7-day refeed or something like that, or a 4-day refeed or whatever you want to call it.
That makes sense. And when you take, like, if you want to sort of calculate a refeed out of your weekly calorie budget, how would you sort of get the numbers you want to utilize for your high day compared to the low days you're going to spend on a deficit?
Okay, so I'll just talk about the way that I do it. So the way that I do diet breaks and refeeds is a little bit different. So the way that we did it for the diet breaks study was we used basically a calculator from the Dietary Reference Index, which is an equation no different to like the Mueller or something like that. It's basically based on sort of anthropometric features and body weight and sex and things like that, activity levels, and that will give you an approximation for your sort of your weight maintenance requirements. And then basically what we do is for all the people at the start of the study, we get them to consume that amount of calories. We just watch what their body weight is doing. And if it's falling down, then we make a 5% calorie adjustment up, or likewise, if their body weight's going up, we make a 5% calorie adjustment down. And then we find after sort of a couple of adjustments, their body weight is just sitting quite flat. And that's what we say, okay, well, how many calories are they actually consuming at this point? That's their weight maintenance figure. But we get that established before we actually get them into the diet weight loss, before we get them into the study. Then each time the diet break comes along, which is every 4th week, that's obviously when we need to increase calories. And we decided that we want them to be eating pretty close to weight maintenance. But if you've just done 3 weeks of dieting, your weight maintenance isn't going to be the same as what it was at the start of the study, right? It needs to be corrected for the loss of tissue that's happened. So basically what we do and what I do for my clients is I just adjust that baseline weight maintenance calorie figure and I adjust it downwards for the amount of body weight that's been lost. Now that's probably that's a kind of rough way to do it. If we wanted to do it perfect, we would have to remeasure resting metabolic rates the sort of day before each diet break we wanted to do to actually see truly how much adaptive thermogenesis is actually taking place and whatnot. But we decided to do it a bit more rough way because like athletes just aren't going, like how practical are our findings going to be if we're telling people, yeah, just go remeasure your resting metabolic rate before you do your diet break and then you'll be bang on. Like it doesn't have much practicality. So that's one way to do it, but you can even do it even quite rougher. I find that even if people just use their baseline weight maintenance calories, so whatever their weight maintenance calorie intake was before they commenced their cut, even following that, you tend to get pretty similar outcomes compared to the more technical way that we used. So yeah, it doesn't need to be too technical to get the adherence benefits and the appetite management benefits, because you got to remember, like if we were talking about sort of better preservation of metabolic rate and better preservation of lean mass and things like that, then I would say, okay, probably need to be a bit more technical to maximize these results. But I've seen from my diet break study that the results are pretty lousy. You're just not seeing much changes. So there doesn't need to be this perfect number of calories that we're consuming during a diet break, as long as you're in positive energy balance. So you're at weight maintenance or slightly above, you are going to get the adherence benefits and the appetite management benefits. You just want to make sure that the calorie intake isn't so high that you're going to be adding a bunch of body fat that's going to further extend your requirements for weight loss to get to your end goal. For refeeds, my process is even more simpler than that. I just say if it's a 1 day refeed, they would just do their weight maintenance calories, whatever I had sort of estimated them originally, and then because I always have a weight maintenance phase at the start to basically understand how many calories this person needs to consume to maintain their body weight, and then when I have that figure, I can use that to sort of be the basis of my refeeding target or my diet break target. You can do it other ways. I know a really common way is to use basically the estimation or the assumption that 1 gram of mixed human tissue containing like body fat and skeletal muscle mass contains around 7 calories per gram. So if you wanted to lose 500 grams of body weight across the week, 7 calories per gram of that is going to demand a 3,500 calorie deficit across the week. And then people might say, okay, well, then I might just say, I'll distribute that 3,500 calorie deficit just on my Monday to Friday days. And then what that means is that you can actually be at your weight maintenance for Saturday and Sunday, and that would technically justify it as your sort of refeed days. So that's another way you can do it.
That sounds like something that I would do. I think that's more the approach I would take. Generally, sort of look at the weekly calorie budget they've got and try to analyze what's the deficit they have to be in to sort of be in the same rate that it is estimated to lose fat. And that is sort of distributed across the week. And then the days you're going to use the refeed, you sort of allowed yourself to get back to that higher calorie amount, and the other days you're sort of adjusted to sort of match the total weekly calorie target. When you implement the diet break, would you ask your clients to sort of look out for their body weight daily, just to see if they have a big impact on their body weight, to see if they're eating way too much over what they should be eating, or you sort of let them be for a week?
Yeah, usually I'll just let them be, because you've got to remember, like, the purpose, if I'm using a diet break for a client, the purpose is to basically put them in a more positive psychological frame of mind. And that's just not going to happen if I'm like, tell me your body weight every morning. Oh, it's up 200 grams. They were going to change. Like, if they're going obsessed about that, you're actually going to be sort of working at the detriment of the original purpose of why we'd actually be doing the diet break. So I try to keep it as relaxed as possible and just say, trust the process. Let me do your numbers, and it'll all be fine. And try to keep them relaxed as possible, because you want them at day 7 of the diet break ideally being like, okay, I feel good, like I'm ready to roll for this next phase of dieting. And that's not going to happen if you're sort of, making them sort of super anal about tiny figures and making a whole lot of adjustments throughout the week.
Would you allow them to be more loose in the sense of not tracking at all, or do you keep them tracking their calories?
If you tell them to not track, that's just asking for trouble, in my opinion. Like, the deeper they are into the cut, the more you're asking for trouble. Like, you got to remember that someone who's lost, let's say, 10% of their body weight, their hunger cues and appetite cues are going to be skewed as fuck. Like, they don't know what a normal amount of food intake should be like anymore, because they can't remember what it's like to be satiated anymore. So if you tell someone just eat by feel, your body has changed your hunger hormone balance to basically put you in a position to regain a whole lot of body weight and body fat really, really quickly. And if you are guided by those cues, that's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to eat the calories plus, and you're going to regain a bunch of body weight and a bunch of body fat really, really fast. So yeah, I definitely don't think that diet breaks are a time for eating intuitively, or yes, perhaps you could say, if someone's really experienced, like I'm talking like multiple contest prep under the belt, and like maybe like 5 years of like regular like calorie tracking, then maybe you can say to them, you might not have to use the app, but that's fine, because they can look at a portion, they can look at a plate that gets served to them, like, okay, that's 50 grams of protein, 80 grams of carbs, 15 grams of fat. But for someone who's sort of less experienced, no, I wouldn't be recommending it.
So what would you say, when would it feel or say that getting out or like not tracking anymore or away from tracking for a while would be more sort of applicable for your clients?
Yeah, like a weight maintenance phase. Like, weight maintenance phases are usually like the transition phases between like cut and gain for most people. So usually what will happen, like if I've taken someone through a pretty gnarly body fat period, and they're ready to gain muscle, I won't sort of push them straight into a muscle gain phase right away. We will have a couple of weeks of just maintenance, and that will usually line up with a bit of a training deload, because training would have been sort of feeling quite nasty up to the end of the cut when energy levels are really low. And usually what I'll also do is I'll sync it up with a period of like let's just put the MyFitnessPal away, and I'll just give some rough guidelines. So I'll say something like, I want you to have 5 meals per day. I want there to be around about 40 to 50 grams of protein per fuel, or depending on how large the person is, 25 to 40 grams of protein per meal. I want you to have around about X amount of carbohydrates, and I want you to have veggies with 3 of those meals. And anything other than that is sort of up to you. And that works quite well. And you give them a couple of weeks of that, and they're like, okay, I'm ready for my regularity and my consistency to be back again. And it's enough of a psychological refreshment for what they need. And
Okay.
for other people, if you don't have body composition or sporting goals, then what are you calorie tracking for? Then you don't need to be tracking. So just eat like a normal human. Like, that's fine. But for people who do have goals that are dependent on a certain level of performance or a certain body composition, you're just not going to achieve those goals without sort of measuring the variables quite accurately. And for the large proportion of the year, yes, you can have some time away, like I just said, with those transition phases. But if you're spending half a year not tracking, that's just not doing things in the most efficient way possible, in my opinion.
It really makes sense, and I completely agree with that. When you're not tracking, you probably are not too sure where you're at, what your numbers are, and objectively, you don't know how much are you actually eating, or how much protein, how much carbohydrate. So it's really hard to sort of pinpoint where could you improve if you want to continue to lose weight. Or same when people ask, well, can I do reverse dieting after a contest prep or something like that without tracking? And it sort of is the same thing. It is really difficult to be objective, or sort of knowing, well, how do you know that you're adding a certain amount of calories and building up towards your maintenance if you're not really sure where you're at? So I think that makes sense completely.
Yeah, I agree.
In the sense of, you mentioned that you're currently doing a little bit of studies on hunger management. So I really wanted to ask you what are some strategies that you would tell a client to improve hunger and satiety regulation?
Yeah, so this is a cool. I've sort of only been in this realm for maybe 6 or 7 months, but I'm really enjoying it. And I should have some studies that are going to be kicking off next year, testing out a few of our ideas. But from my synthesis of the research so far, some cool strategies that you can use to manage hunger. Well, number one, which is sort of your most bang for your buck, is to consume a low energy dense diet. So energy density refers to basically how many calories are contained per 100 grams of food weight. So for example, there's a hell of a lot more calories in 100 grams of peanut butter than there is in 100 grams of oatmeal, for example. So in that sense, peanut butter is a very highly calorie dense food. Now, what the research shows is, as humans, we add pretty similar amounts of food weight per day. But the differences in the calorie content of what humans consume each day is extraordinarily different. So basically what that says is, if you consume the same amount of food weight that most humans are consuming, but you consume it from predominantly low energy dense foods like chicken breast, oatmeal, sweet potato, things like that, you're going to consume that same amount of food weight with less calories. You're going to have a far easier time managing your body composition than otherwise. So when people are sort of trying to lose fat, one of the easiest strategies you can use is just to basically try to limit as many calorie dense foods that you can. So calorie dense things would be like peanut butter, but most dietary fats are very calorie dense. If we're going onto the carbohydrates, like things that contain lots of sugar, like honey, they're really calorie dense as well. And then if we want to go to the meats, like the fattier cuts of meat, they're more calorie dense. So that's just a very easy one. And I feel like this is what a lot of the flexible dieters made basically worse for the fitness industry, because it taught them that we could now fit Snickers bars and Pop Tarts and things like that into our daily diet, as long as we're within our calorie budget, and we'll continue to lose fat. But I feel like it's sort of grown out of proportion now, and flexible dieting's more so become this game where it's like, the cooler I am is the more junk that I can fit in my calories, and like you get props on IG because everyone's sort of posting how many Snickers, or I had a Snickers bar every day and I lost 800 grams, and you get props from your social media homies, but at the end of the day, it's probably actually making your fat loss more difficult, because you're just going to have more of a tougher time managing your hunger levels. If you took that 220 calories from your Snickers bar and you allocated it to like sweet potatoes, holy shit, that's a lot more food with the sweet potato. That's far more pronounced satiety response than the Snickers bar is going to have. So managing energy density is a very good one. Another good one is chewing. So if research has shown that if you chew more frequently per mouthful, so more chews per mouthful, and if you chew slower, then you actually consume less when participants are put in ad libitum feeding conditions. So when your food comes around and you're in contest prep or in a fat loss phase, don't gorge it. Take it as long as you can. I know a lot of people like to use small cutlery during sort of fat loss phases, and that makes a lot of, it's going to require sort of, it's going to delay the meal, elongate the meal, and it's going to require more chews, more mouthfuls. So that can be a little handy trick as well. One other trick is the visual importance of our meal. So there was a study not too long ago that put participants in the dark and fed them a meal. And it was basically like a supersized junk food meal, like burgers, chips, sundae. Like we're talking enormous amount of calories. I think the meal overall had like 2,800 calories or something like that. And the participants ate it in the dark. And then what they did is they asked participants to estimate sort of how many calories they consumed, and rank their satiety response and things like that. And most of them were estimating the calorie content at like a normal meal, like 750 calories, or even lower for some people. So what the authors basically confirmed is like they're still components of satiety. So if we want to apply it, how can we apply this data? Pay attention to your food. So when you are eating, actually look at it. Don't be on Instagram like a lot of people do. TV dinners, not a good idea. It's like there's some sort of connection with the visual signal of seeing our food and consuming it that leads to basically the satiety response, which really is really cool. Another one following on from that is the impact of smell that can have on basically our appetite. So in a really cool study, they got participants to fill out like this bogus questionnaire in a room. And then on one condition, the room was unscented. And then on the other condition, they scented the room with like toasty warm bread, like fresh bread all through the room.
Ooh.
After they'd filled out the questionnaire, they were then provided with soup. And it was just a basic ass like vegetable soup. And they were just told, like, thanks for the study. Here's like a little parting like a little meal for doing the questionnaire, because I think the questionnaire went for about over an hour or something like that. And they gave them the soup, and then they just monitored how much of the soup people consumed versus when they were in the no scented room compared to the room scented with bread. And the people who had come from the room scented in bread, they had about double the amount of soup on average than the people that didn't have the smell. So it seems like if you're in close proximity to things that smell really, really nice, it can actually ramp up our appetite for even foods that don't even taste good. Like, who wants veggie soup? Like, not me. But like the nice smelling stuff can make you even want to eat more of that stuff. So practically applying that, probably not a good idea if you're in a fat loss phase to go get your coffee from your favorite breakfast spot where you know you love to have eggs Benedict or the smell of bacon or something like that. Probably not a good idea to bake a bunch of cookies for your family, and then even if you don't plan to eat them, to sort of just give them to your family. Like, for whatever reason, all of my female clients, they love to start baking every fat loss phase. I don't know what it is, but they become like serial bakers like every fat loss phase, and they're baking cookies and muffins and all sorts of things. But yeah, probably not ideal. Probably not ideal because it's probably just going to make, again, managing hunger a little bit more difficult. What else is there? Simple things like spreading foods over your plate can have, this is again ties into the visual component of satiety. There was a study that showed basically when you had one group who was given one meal, but all the food was like squished together in a really small size, versus another group who had the same amount of food, but it was all spread over like this big plate. It looked like a lot more food. The people where it was spread over a big plate, they actually reported feeling more full and more satiated than the group that had it sort of really small. So it seems like they're like the expectations or our anticipations of what a food is going to do for our satiety actually impacts the satiety response in itself, which is kind of cool. So if you can sort of, you might be able to actually like hack your brain. I hate using like the biohacking word because it's crap, but you might be able to sort of play a trick on your brain by like making it think that you're consuming more food than you actually are, by sort of bulking up your plate volume with some like extra veggies and things like that, and chopping things up and spreading it out. So yeah, I probably won't. There's a few more that I could go on to, but that's probably enough to whet everyone's appetites.
No, that's amazing. I wonder whether like applying mindfulness, would that be as well another thing that would be useful in that hunger management, or it's not necessarily applicable?
Well, I think the mindfulness plays into a lot about with like actually being,
Slowing down?
yeah, slowing down, having like lots of mouthfuls before chewing. Make sure you're actually looking at your food, sort of watching TV or scrolling IG while you've got your other free hand sort of slamming down the food. Not eating too fast. I feel like a lot of those things are all sort of linked to
Yeah.
mindfulness in itself. So absolutely, I think if we want to sort of collectively call some of those strategies as being more mindful with your meals, then absolutely.
Would the color of the plate or the color of the combination of foods would affect some of these aspects of satiety?
Yeah, I saw this cool study that showed that like white plates were less satiating than like red plates. And I remember making the joke at the time, like, oh, that's good because I'll just keep eating off my Spider-Man plate. But yeah, I don't know how pronounced the effects are. Like, I don't think, I probably wouldn't be telling all my clients. I haven't been telling all my clients to run out and buy red plates yet. But yeah, there does look like there's something interesting there.
That sounds really cool. And someone has, I don't know whether that's part of the research or you've heard of these, or if you could bring some light into this. And this is going to be the last question. When someone says that, like, drink water before, in between, and after, and if you drink even colder water, that increases the satiety. What is that any true about that?
Yeah, so my brain's done a little bit of a 180 on this one too. So I was basically like maybe like a year ago, a year and a half ago, I was very much like with the pack, and the pack mentality was like drink as much fluids like between meals, with meals. That's going to enhance satiety. But there's been a couple of studies more recently that have basically thrown that into question a little bit for me. There was one study which compared um, eating a chicken breast versus drinking that same chicken breast blended up with water. I know, gross, but yeah. And so when I was reading through this study, I was like, well, you're getting the extra volume from the water, which is going to further activate stretch receptors in the gut, theoretically, and that this should translate to a more pronounced satiety response. But even with the extra water volume, eating the chicken breast was still more satiating. So that was quite interesting, and that makes me think, okay, maybe fluid volume isn't that important if like having the solid chicken breast can still be more satiating than having the blended chicken breast plus the water. So that was the first thing that sort of threw it into question a little bit. Then a second study, and I've actually got the study on my IG. I'd say it would probably be 8, 10, 12 months ago now. But basically they wanted to look at the effects of consuming liquids, I believe from memory, it was about 30 minutes prior to a meal. Might have been an hour, but I think it was 30 minutes, around about 600 mils. And again, I was like, well, obvious, you drink the 600 mils of fluid, you have more volume in the gut. When you go into that meal, you're going to eat less. But the people who had the drink before the meal, they actually ate more. And what the researchers said was consuming fluid between meals actually stimulates gastric motility, and this has a follow-on effect to sort of ramping up hunger cues or hunger signals. So maybe drinking between meals is making us more hungry. And like, who am I to judge? Because I know that when I've been super hungry, like I've defaulted a few times when like I'll just have a drink. But like I don't ever remember being like, oh yeah, like that drink hit the spot. I'm not hungry anymore. Like I still remember being hungry. So maybe it's not. Maybe this whole sort of fluids between meals and before meals is a little bit overblown. I do think that like we probably need a little bit more research to dive into this, because there could be a myth here, like that we just all believe that hasn't been really crushed yet. But yeah, I do think the benefits of fluids for enhancing satiety probably a little bit overstated, but we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Jackson, it's been an amazing live. I think I've learned a lot from you, especially in these 20 last minutes where we spoke about this hunger management. I am blown away with some of the things you mentioned. So I'm super interested in seeing those research coming up from you. Where people could find you. You have a YouTube channel as well, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so best place to get me is IG. Like that's where I'm most active. I do my best to answer all DMs. But yeah, I'll be posting things, research updates. So most of the things I'll post will all go through IG. But like you said, I have started my YouTube channel earlier this year. It's like a mix of some education, some training, always some food, and then a bit of lifestyle stuff too. So if anyone's keen to know a bit more about what I do on the daily, then YouTube's a good place to catch me too.
It was a pleasure to have a chat with you, Jackson, and I hope to see you soon at any other time. If you want to have another hangout with me, I'd love to do that again.
Thank you so much, Astrid. I'm very grateful.